Rain slashes against the windshield of a $300,000 Aston Martin, dead on the shoulder of Route 9. Inside sits a woman whose time is worth thousands a minute, utterly powerless against a flooded engine. Outside, a rusted Ford pickup pulls onto the gravel. A man steps out into the downpour, tired to his bones, just trying to get his sleeping daughter home. Two lives separated by 15 years, billions of dollars, and a mountain of unspoken regrets are about to collide over a blown fuse. The rain didn't care about net worth. It came down in sheets, hammering the sleek slate-gray roof of Chloe Bennett's custom Aston Martin Rapide with the same brutal indifference it showed the cracked asphalt beneath it. Chloe gripped the leather steering wheel. Her knuckles were white, the manicured nails pressing crescent moons into the pristine calfskin. The dashboard, usually a glowing cockpit of digital perfection, was dead. Completely, stubbornly dark. No hazard lights, no climate control. Just the suffocating sound of the storm beating against safety glass. She slammed the heel of her hand against the horn. Silence. Useless, she muttered, her voice swallowed by the enclosed space. She snatched her phone from the passenger seat. No service. Of course there was no service. She had demanded total isolation for the weekend, a desperate attempt to clear her head before the board voted on the aggressive acquisition of Apex Logistics on Monday. She had fired her driver for the day, ignored her security detail's protests, and driven 2 hours north into the hills. Now she was paying the idiot tax. The billionaire CEO of Vanguard Holdings was trapped in a 3-ton paperweight on a desolate stretch of mountain road, miles from a cell tower, freezing in a silk blouse. She shivered, pulling her tailored blazer tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the world was a pitch-black void, interrupted only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the dense, skeletal trees. She felt a creeping sense of vulnerability. It was a sensation she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a decade. Vulnerability was for competitors. It was for the people sitting across the negotiating table. It wasn't for her. Yet here she was, a sitting duck. 3 miles down the same winding road, Tommy Miller was doing mental math. Rent was due in 4 days. The heating bill had doubled. His daughter's winter boots were already pinching her toes, and he needed a new set of brake pads for the truck before the snow really started sticking. It was a relentless, grinding equation that never quite balanced out to zero. He rubbed his eyes, leaning his heavy frame against the driver's side door of his 2008 Ford F-150. The heater was blasting, blowing dry, stale air into his face. It smelled faintly of old coffee and motor oil, the permanent cologne of a man who worked 60 hours a week under other people's cars. In the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of 7-year-old Lily. She was dead to the world in her booster seat, her cheek pressed against the window, a frayed, stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Tommy smiled, a small, weary shifting of his facial muscles. She was the only part of the equation that mattered. He downshifted as the truck hit a steep incline. The windshield wipers squeaked, fighting a losing battle against the deluge. The headlights, fogged with age, threw weak yellow beams into the storm. Then he saw it. A sleek, dark shape crouched on the narrow shoulder ahead. It was practically invisible, a hazard waiting to be rear-ended by a semi-truck. No lights, no flares. Just a very expensive piece of machinery sitting dangerously close to the white line. Tommy sighed. A deep, bone-rattling exhale. He didn't have time for this. He wanted to get home. He wanted to carry Lily to her bed, take a scorching hot shower to wash the grease from his cuticles, and sleep for a solid 5 hours before his next shift at the garage. He tapped the brakes. The truck slowed. He could just drive past. Whoever owned that car could afford a private tow. They probably had a platinum roadside assistance card in their designer wallet. They didn't need a tired mechanic in a wet flannel shirt. But the car was sitting on a blind curve. "Damn it," Tommy muttered. He pulled the truck onto the shoulder, 50 feet behind the dead vehicle. He left the headlights on, illuminating the rain-slicked rear of the Aston Martin, and flipped on his amber hazard lights. He turned around, checking on Lily. She snuffled, shifting slightly, but remained asleep. Tommy zipped up his faded canvas jacket, pulled a heavy-duty mag light from the glove compartment, and pushed his door open. The rain hit him instantly, cold and sharp. He stepped out into the mud, his steel-toed boots crunching on the gravel. He walked toward the expensive car, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the sheets of rain. He didn't know who was inside. He didn't care. He just needed to get them off the road before somebody got killed. Inside the Aston Martin, Chloe flinched as the sudden glare of headlights flooded her rearview mirror. Panic, sharp and immediate, spiked in her chest. She twisted around. A large, battered pickup truck was parked behind her. The amber hazard lights blinked rhythmically, casting distorted yellow shadows through the rain-streaked glass. A figure stepped out of the truck, tall, broad-shouldered, holding a heavy flashlight. Chloe's hand instinctively dropped to the heavy metal water bottle in the center console. Her mind raced through the grim statistics of women stranded on highways. She checked the door locks. Engaged. She held her breath as the figure approached, the beam of the flashlight sweeping over the rear bumper, the tires, and finally the driver's side window. A knuckles rapped sharply on the glass. Chloe flinched. She didn't roll it down. Tommy stood in the freezing rain, water running down his face and soaking into the collar of his jacket. He shone the flashlight down at the ground so he wouldn't blind the driver, then leaned close to the tinted glass. He could barely make out a silhouette inside, someone huddled in the driver's seat. He knocked again, louder this time. "Hey!" he yelled over the roar of the rain. "You're sitting on a blind curve. You need to turn your hazards on." Chloe stared through the waterlogged glass. She couldn't hear the exact words, just the deep muffled resonance of a male voice. She cracked the window exactly 1 inch. Cold air and the deafening sound of the storm rushed in. "I have a phone!" she shouted, her voice tight, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Help is already on the way. Just keep driving." Tommy wiped a stream of water from his eyes. He heard the defensive edge in her voice. He didn't blame her. A strange man in the dark on a lonely road. "Lady!" Tommy yelled back, leaning closer to the crack. "Your battery's dead. You have no lights. I almost hit you, and the next guy coming around this bend going 60 will turn this car into a tin can. Pop the hood." "I told you, someone is coming," Chloe lied, her grip on the water bottle tightening. Tommy sighed, the breath visible in the cold air. He was soaking wet, exhausted, and losing his patience. "Look," he said, his voice dropping into a flat, no-nonsense register. "I'm a mechanic. I'm off the clock. I've got a sleeping kit in my truck and I want to go home. But I'm not leaving you here to get broadsided. Pop the hood. Let me see if I can jump the relay or at least get your hazards flashing so you don't die tonight. Then I'm gone." Chloe hesitated. The rational, calculating part of her brain, the part that evaluated risks and leveraged assets, analyzed his words. He mentioned a kid. He sounded annoyed, not predatory, just tired. And he was right. She was a sitting target. Slowly her finger moved to the hood release lever. She pulled it. Click. The hood popped up 1 inch. "Thank you," Tommy muttered to himself. He walked to the front of the car. The wind whipped his wet hair across his forehead as he lifted the heavy hood. He propped it open and shone his flashlight into the engine bay. It was pristine. A complex, beautifully engineered piece of machinery, completely ruined by something incredibly stupid. Tommy leaned in, the smell of hot metal and ozone mixing with the damp earth. He traced the lines of the battery casing, looking for the bypass terminals. These high-end European cars were a nightmare of electronics. Everything ran through a centralized computer module. Inside, Chloe watched him. The headlights of his truck illuminated him from behind, creating a halo of rain around his broad shoulders. She watched his hands move over the engine. Large, capable hands. Dirty hands. He pulled a pair of pliers from a sheath on his belt and began working at a terminal block near the firewall. He clamped the flashlight between his teeth, freeing both hands to strip a small section of wire. For a fleeting second, the angle of his face caught the glow of the flashlight, a strong jawline, a slight crook in his nose like it had been broken and poorly set a long time ago. Chloe felt a strange, jarring twitch in her chest, a ghost of a memory, immediately dismissed. It was just the stress. 10 minutes passed. Tommy's hands were numb. The rain was relentless. He found the culprit, a blown main fusible link, likely tripped by water shorting out a secondary sensor. It was a fail-safe that killed the entire electrical system to prevent a fire. Stupid design for a rainstorm, but smart for a lawsuit. He didn't have a replacement link, but he could bridge it, just long enough to get the car started and the lights on. He pulled a thick piece of copper wire from his jacket pocket, a leftover from a stereo install earlier that week, and wedged it between the terminals, clamping it down hard with the pliers. Sparks spat into the wet air. "All right," Tommy mumbled around the flashlight. He slammed the hood shut. He walked back to the driver's side window. He tapped the glass. Chloe rolled it down a few more inches. "Try it now," Tommy said, shivering, his breath pluming in the dark. Chloe pressed the push-to-start button. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. The massive engine roared to life with a deep, throaty growl. Heat instantly began pouring from the vents. The hazard lights began their rhythmic clicking. Relief washed over Chloe so intensely it almost made her dizzy. Power. She had power again. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. She looked up at the stranger. The water was streaming off his face, his clothes plastered to his body. "I don't know how to thank you. You were right. I was completely stuck." Tommy took a step back, wiping grease onto the leg of his wet jeans. "Keep the engine running. Don't turn it off until you're in a well-lit garage. The bypass won't hold forever. Drive slow." He turned to walk away. "Wait," Chloe called out. She reached into the center console, grabbing her wallet. She pulled out a small stack of bills. Hundreds. She didn't count them. She just shoved them through the cracked window. "Here, please, take this for your time." Tommy stopped. He looked at the money protruding from the window. Maybe $500, more than he made in 2 days. It would pay the heating bill. It would buy Lily the boots. He stepped back toward the car. Tommy reached out. His thick, calloused fingers brushed against the crisp bills. At that exact moment, another car crested the hill behind his truck. Its high beams swept across the scene, cutting sharply through the darkness and the rain. The intense light flooded the space between them, obliterating the shadows. For 2 painfully long seconds, they were perfectly illuminated. Tommy's eyes adjusted to the glare, looking past the money and into the car. He saw her, the immaculate blowout, now slightly frizzy from the damp air, the sharp, assessing hazel eyes, the subtle, defiant set of her jaw. She was older. The soft curves of youth had been replaced by the sharp, polished edges of a woman who commanded rooms and ruined careers before lunch. She wore a watch that cost more than his life insurance policy. But it was her. Chloe's hand froze midair. The high beams hit the mechanic's face. She saw the scar, a thin, pale line cutting through his left eyebrow. She knew that scar. She knew exactly how he got it, falling off a rusted BMX bike behind the bleachers at Westview High when they were 16, trying to impress her. She saw the crooked nose. She saw the eyes, deep brown, carrying a weight that hadn't been there when they were kids sneaking cheap beers on the hood of his first car. "Tommy?" The name slipped out of her mouth before she could stop it. It didn't sound like the CEO of Vanguard Holdings. It sounded small. It sounded like the 18-year-old girl who had packed her bags for Stanford and never looked back. Tommy let go of the money. He pulled his hand back as if the paper had burned him. The bills fluttered down, landing on the wet pavement. The passing car drove on, and the darkness rushed back in, leaving only the weak ambient glow of the dashboard and the hazard lights. But the damage was done. The veil was gone. "Chloe," Tommy said. His voice was entirely different now. The professional, detached annoyance of a mechanic was stripped away. What replaced it was a heavy, suffocating silence. 15 years. 15 years since she had sat in the passenger seat of his old Honda, crying while the engine idled outside her parents' house. 15 years since she had told him that she couldn't stay in this town, that she had a plan, a trajectory, and that he, with his stained hands and simple dreams of opening a garage, wasn't on it. I didn't, Chloe stammered. Her brain, capable of processing complex global market trends in seconds, stalled entirely. She stared at him. He looked so tired. The youthful energy that had once drawn her to him was gone, ground down by the years. "You're wet," she said. The most useless, stupid observation she had ever made in her life. Tommy stared at her. He looked at the luxurious leather interior of the Aston Martin. He looked at the silk blouse, the diamond studs in her ears. He saw the empire she had built, the empire she had left him to build. Then he thought about the rusted truck idling 50 feet away. He thought about the final notice from the electric company sitting on his kitchen counter. He thought about Lily, sleeping in the back, unaware of the ghost standing in the rain. A bitter, cynical smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Looks like the plan worked out for you, Chloe," he said quietly. The words weren't angry. They were just a statement of absolute, irrefutable fact. "Nice car." "Tommy, wait," she said, her voice rising, a sudden desperation gripping her. She hit the button to roll the window down all the way. The rain blew into the car, spotting her silk blouse, but she didn't care. "What are you doing here? How have you been?" "Surviving," he said flatly. He looked down at the mud. The $100 bills were soaking up the dirty water, turning into soggy green pulp. He didn't bend down to pick them up. He couldn't. Taking money from a stranded rich lady was one thing. Taking money from Chloe Bennett felt like swallowing glass. "I need to get my kid home," Tommy said. He took a step back, retreating into the shadows outside the reach of the hazard lights. "Your kid?" Chloe repeated, the words hitting her like a physical blow. Of course he had a kid. He had a life that happened entirely without her. "Tommy, please don't just walk away. Let me help you. Give me your number. Let me send a tow truck. Let me write you a real check." "I don't need your check, Chloe." Tommy cut her off. His voice was hard now. The walls were up. The mechanic was back. "Your car's running. The bypass will hold if you don't push it past 60. Get off at the next exit and find a hotel." He turned around and started walking back toward his truck. "Tommy!" she yelled over the storm, leaning out the window into the rain. He didn't look back. He walked with heavy, deliberate steps. He opened the door of the F-150, climbed inside, and slammed the door shut. Chloe sat frozen in the driver's seat. She watched the rusted pickup shift into gear. The taillights flared red as he pulled back onto the road, the truck accelerating slowly, steadily, until it disappeared around the bend. She was alone again. The engine of the Aston Martin hummed perfectly beneath her. The heat was blowing. She was safe. She was powerful. She looked down at the mud beside her door. The $100 bills were still there, plastered to the asphalt, worthless in the rain. Chloe closed her eyes, leaned her head back against the luxurious headrest, and for the first time in 10 years, she began to cry. Tommy's apartment smelled like boiled cabbage and damp drywall. It sat above a defunct dry cleaner on the edge of town, a cramped 2-bedroom unit where the radiators clanked like a chain gang but rarely put out actual heat. Tommy carried Lily up the 3 flights of stairs. His knees popped in the quiet stairwell, his right shoulder, permanently stiff from years of pulling wrenches at awkward angles, burned with a dull ache. He managed to unlock the deadbolt without waking her. Inside, the air was 10 degrees colder than it should have been. He laid Lily down on her twin bed, carefully pulling her pink fleece blanket up to her chin. She curled into a tight ball, clutching the frayed rabbit. Tommy stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. The harsh, rhythmic wheeze in her chest was acting up again. The damp weather always made her asthma worse. He walked into the narrow kitchen and turned on the tap. The pipe shuddered before spitting out a stream of lukewarm water. He splashed his face, scrubbing the grease and the rain from his skin, but he couldn't scrub away the image of Chloe's face in the headlights. He gripped the edges of the cheap laminate sink. His knuckles turned white. $400, maybe $5. It had just been sitting there in the mud. He could have paid the overdue gas bill sitting on the counter. He could have bought the inhaler refills without having to beg the pharmacist to front him the cost until Friday. Pride was a stupid, expensive luxury, and tonight he had afforded it. He walked over to the small, rickety dining table. The mail was piled in a neat, depressing stack. Final notice, past due. A letter from the bank regarding the commercial lease on the garage. The math was suffocating. He sank into the creaking wooden chair and buried his face in his hands. He didn't want to think about Chloe Bennett. He didn't want to think about the silk blouse or the $300,000 car or the fact that she looked exactly the way he had always feared she would. Untouchable. Perfect. Moving at a velocity he could never hope to match. 50 miles south in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons, Chloe wasn't sleeping either. The suite was a masterclass in sterile luxury. High thread count sheets. Temperature control set to a precise 68 degrees. A panoramic view of a city that she practically owned. Yet she sat at the edge of the California king bed, shivering in a plush hotel bathrobe, her mind locked on a muddy shoulder of Route 9. She poured herself a glass of Macallan 25. The amber liquid burned her throat, but it did nothing to quiet the noise in her head. Tommy Miller. For a decade, she had convinced herself that leaving him was simply the cost of doing business. Ambition required collateral damage. She had outgrown the town, outgrown the smallness of their shared dreams. She had built Vanguard Holdings from a ruthless little startup into a predatory behemoth. She acquired, she liquidated, she conquered. She didn't look back. Looking back was bad for the stock price. But seeing him, seeing the weariness etched into the lines of his face, the faded canvas jacket, the sheer crushing exhaustion in his eyes, shattered the carefully constructed narrative she had lived by. He wasn't just some fond high school memory. He was a man fighting to keep his head above water. And he had looked at her not with awe, and not even with anger. He had looked at her with pity. Pity for the fact that she thought throwing a handful of cash out of a luxury car could fix the gulf between them. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, resting her forehead against the cool glass. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. "Damn it," she whispered. She walked to the bedside table and picked up her phone. It was 3:15 a.m. She hit a speed dial number. It rang twice. "Garrison," a gravelly, alert voice answered. "I need a file pulled," Chloe said, her voice dropping into its usual authoritative register. The momentary vulnerability was gone, buried under a lifetime of corporate armor. "Quietly, no company resources. Personal account." "Name?" Garrison asked. He was her head of security, a man who traded in discretion and leverage. "Thomas Miller. Last known address would be somewhere around Black Ridge. He's a mechanic, drives a dark blue, mid-2000s Ford F-150. I want everything on my desk by Monday at 7 a.m. Financials, property, family, everything." "Consider it done, Ms. Bennett." Chloe hung up. She looked at the half-empty glass of scotch, then poured it down the bathroom sink. She needed to be sharp. Monday was going to be a bloodbath at the office. But for the first time in her career, the boardroom wasn't the battlefield she was dreading. Monday morning at Vanguard Holdings was a choreographed symphony of aggression. Chloe walked through the glass-walled corridors of the 50th floor in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that felt like armor. Analysts stepped out of her way. Junior executives lowered their voices. She was a predator walking through the tall grass, and everyone knew a kill was scheduled for 10 a.m. The Apex Logistics acquisition was supposed to be the crown jewel of Q3. Apex was bleeding cash, top-heavy with redundant management, but they owned prime distribution real estate. Chloe's plan was simple. Buy them out, fire the board, gut the middle management, and fold the real estate into Vanguard's portfolio. It was clean. It was ruthless. It was exactly what she did best. She took her seat at the head of the massive mahogany conference table. The Apex executives sat opposite her, sweating through their tailored shirts. They threw up spreadsheets. They talked about legacy, about employee retention, about community impact. Chloe didn't hear a word of it. Her eyes were fixed on the thick, unmarked manila folder sitting on the table directly in front of her. Garrison had dropped it off at 6:45 a.m. She hadn't opened it yet. The physical weight of the paper inside seemed to exert a gravitational pull, drawing all the oxygen out of the room. "Ms. Bennett?" The CEO of Apex, a graying man named Robert, was looking at her with a mixture of hope and terror. "If you review page 42, you'll see our projections for keeping the local hubs operational." "I don't care about your projections, Robert," Chloe interrupted. Her voice was flat. Dead. The room instantly fell silent. "Vanguard is offering $30 a share. That's a 20% premium on your closing price from Friday. We aren't keeping the hubs open. We are liquidating the fleet and repurposing the warehouses. You have until noon to sign the term sheet, or I withdraw the offer and let the market know how highly leveraged your debt is. By Friday, you'll be trading at $12. She stood up. "I have other matters to attend to. My general counsel will walk you through the paperwork." She picked up the manila folder and walked out of the room. She didn't look back to see the devastation on their faces. She didn't feel the usual rush of adrenaline that came with a victory. She just felt hollow. Once inside her private office, a cavernous room of steel, leather, and abstract art, she locked the door. She walked to her desk, sat down, and finally opened the folder. The paper cut like a knife. Garrison was thorough. It was an autopsy of a man's life, laid out in bank statements, medical records, and public filings. Tommy hadn't just stayed in Blackridge to fix cars. He had taken over his father's shop when the old man had a stroke. He had married a woman named Sarah Jenkins when he was 24. Chloe felt a tight, ugly knot form in her stomach as she looked at a printed photograph of them. Sarah was pretty, with a warm, open smile. They looked happy. Then she turned the page. 4 years ago, Sarah was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. Chloe's eyes scanned the clinical, brutal reality of the American healthcare system, the insurance caps, the out-of-pocket expenses, the experimental treatments that weren't covered. Tommy had remortgaged the shop. He had maxed out every credit line. He had sold off his father's classic car collection piece by piece. Sarah died 2 years later. She left behind a mountain of the medical debt, a failing auto garage, and a 3-year-old daughter named Lily. Chloe stared at the final page. It was a notice of foreclosure. The bank was seizing Miller and Son Auto in exactly 28 days. The commercial property was slated to be auctioned off. Tommy was drowning, and the water was finally over his head. She pushed the folder away. Her hands were shaking. She looked at her own office. The ridiculous, excessive wealth of it. The painting on the wall behind her cost more than Tommy's entire commercial property. She made money by destroying companies like Apex Logistics. Tommy lost everything trying to save the person he loved. The contrast was sickening. Chloe stood up and walked to the window. She had spent 15 years convincing herself that she had made the right choice. She had chosen power over a small-town life. But looking down at the city, she realized something she had aggressively avoided for a decade. Power was isolating. It was cold. She pressed the intercom button on her desk. "Cancel my afternoon," she told her assistant. "Ms. Bennett, you have the press conference for the Apex acquisition at 3. Cancel it. Send the COO and have the garage bring up my car, the rental." She didn't want the Aston Martin. She wanted the nondescript black Chevy Tahoe they kept for bad weather. She grabbed her coat. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do, but she knew she couldn't sit in this glass tower for another second. Blackridge had not aged well. The main street, once a bustling strip of local diners and hardware stores, was now a graveyard of boarded-up windows and fading "for lease" signs. The economic decay was palpable, hanging over the town like a heavy gray smog. Chloe drove the heavy SUV slowly past the high school where they had met, past the diner where they used to split milkshakes because neither could afford a full one. It felt like driving through a museum of a life she had abandoned. She found Miller and Son Auto on the industrial edge of town, sitting precariously near the river. The building was a corrugated steel structure, its white paint peeling off in large, jagged flakes. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded a gravel lot filled with a half-dozen dead cars waiting for parts or salvation. Above the open bay doors, a faded, hand-painted sign read, "Miller and Son Auto, honest work." Chloe parked the Tahoe near the fence. She sat in the car for 5 minutes, the engine idling. What was she doing? She was a billionaire CEO. She didn't do drop-ins. She sent lawyers. She sent fixers. She didn't show up in person to confront her guilt. Just drive away. Her corporate instincts screamed, "This is messy. This is a liability." But she turned off the ignition, stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, and walked across the gravel. The inside of the garage smelled intensely of motor oil, oxidized metal, and cheap, burnt coffee. It was a cacophony of sound. A heavy pneumatic drill whined in the background, competing with a classic rock station blaring from a dust-covered boombox. Chloe stood in the entryway, her tailored wool coat starkly out of place against the backdrop of grime and machinery. She saw him immediately. Tommy was lying on a creeper, slid halfway under a rusted Toyota sedan. Only his legs and his torso were visible. He was wearing the same faded canvas jacket, stained with fresh grease. "We're closed for walk-ins." His voice echoed from under the chassis, muffled by the metal. "Tow-ins only. Try Jim's down on 4th Street. "I don't need a mechanic," Chloe said. Her voice cut through the noise of the garage, sharp and clear. The wrenching stopped. For a long moment, there was just the sound of the radio playing a scratchy guitar riff. Then the creeper rolled out. Tommy sat up, wiping his hands on a heavy red rag. His face was smeared with black grease across his cheekbone. He looked at her boots, sleek Italian leather, and let his eyes travel up to her face. He didn't look surprised. He just looked exhausted. "Of course you don't," Tommy said, his tone dripping with a heavy leaden cynicism. He stood up, towering over her, wiping the wrench in his hand with slow, deliberate motions. "I figured the luxury car wasn't a one-time rental. What are you doing here, Chloe?" "I wanted to make sure you got home okay on Friday." She lied. It was a weak opening, and she knew it. Tommy let out a dry, harsh laugh. He tossed the wrench onto a metal workbench. The clatter was incredibly loud. "Right. You drove 2 hours to check on my commute. Was the check not enough to clear your conscience, so you had to come deliver it in person?" "I didn't bring a check, Tommy." "Good, because I wouldn't take it." He walked over to a battered sink in the corner and started scrubbing his hands with a gritty orange soap. He didn't look at her. "I told you on the highway, I don't need your charity. I don't need a handout from a CEO playing tourist in her old hometown." "It's not charity," Chloe said, stepping further into the garage. The gravel crunched under her boots. "I know about the bank, Tommy." Tommy froze. The water ran over his hands, turning gray, then clear. He turned the tap off slowly. When he turned around, the exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by a cold, hard anger. "You ran a background check on me." His voice was dangerously quiet. "I have resources. I wanted to know what happened to you. You have no right." He took a step toward her, closing the distance. The smell of oil and sweat was overpowering, but Chloe held her ground. She refused to step back. "You have absolutely no right to dig into my life. You forfeited that right 15 years ago when you packed your bags and decided I wasn't good enough for the master plan." "I never said you weren't good enough," Chloe fired back, the polished executive facade finally cracking. "I said I couldn't stay here. Look around, Tommy. This town is dying. It was dying then. I wanted to build something." "And you did," he said, gesturing to her expensive coat, the Tahoe sitting in the lot. "Congratulations. You won capitalism. Now get out of my shop." "But they're foreclosing in 28 days, she pushed, her voice desperate. "You're going to lose the building. You're going to lose the lot. Where are you and Lily going to go?" "That is none of your damn business." Tommy's jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped. We'll survive. We always do. I'll work a second shift. I'll rent a bay at Jim's. I will figure it out, just like I figured it out when Sarah got sick, and just like I figured it out when the bills piled up. I don't need a savior. I'm not trying to be your savior. I'm trying to be a business partner. The words hung in the dusty air. Tommy stared at her, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. What? Chloe took a breath, forcing her racing heart to slow down. She needed to speak his language. She couldn't offer pity. He would reject it. She had to offer pragmatism. Vanguard Holdings just acquired Apex Logistics this morning, Chloe said, slipping back into a cadence she knew well. The pitch. Apex has a regional distribution problem. They run long-haul trucks down Route 9, but their nearest maintenance hub is 80 miles south of here. It costs them thousands in deadhead miles when a rig breaks down. Tommy crossed his arms. He didn't interrupt, but his posture was a wall of pure skepticism. This lot, Chloe gestured around the garage. It's zoned commercial. It's 2 miles off the highway. It has the footprint to handle heavy-duty bays. I want to buy the deed from the bank, clear your debt, and lease the property back to you. Vanguard gets a localized maintenance hub for the Apex fleet. You get guaranteed commercial contracts. We upgrade the lifts, we reinforce the concrete for the semis, and you run the operation. Tommy stared at her. The silence stretched out, heavy and thick. He looked at the rusted roof, at the tools he had inherited from his father, and then back at the woman who had broken his heart. You're full of it, he said softly. It's a sound logistical move, she insisted, though her voice shook slightly. It saves Vanguard money in the long run. It's a write-off on the capital improvements. Don't give me the corporate bullshit, Chloe, Tommy snapped. He pointed a grease-stained finger at her. You don't care about a maintenance hub on Route 9. You care about the fact that you saw me standing in the mud and you realized I'm a loser. You want to buy this place so you can pat yourself on the back, fly back to your penthouse, and tell yourself you saved the poor mechanic. That's not true, isn't it? He challenged, stepping so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. If I was anyone else, just some random guy who fixed your fuse, would you be standing in this freezing garage right now offering $1 million corporate contract? Chloe opened her mouth to lie. She wanted to tell him yes. She wanted to say it was purely business. But looking at the scar on his eyebrow, looking at the man who had lost everything while she gained the world, she couldn't do it. No, she whispered. The word felt like pulling a tooth. I wouldn't be here. At least you're honest, Tommy muttered. He turned his back on her, walking back toward the creeper. Take your contract and get out, Chloe. I'm not a charity case, and I'm not a pet project for a bored billionaire. I have work to do. He slid back under the rusted Toyota. The conversation was over. Chloe stood in the middle of the garage, the mechanical whine of the drills starting up again, drowning out any chance of a retort. She had come here expecting to fix a problem with a stroke of a pen. She had expected him to be grateful. Instead, she felt smaller than she had in her entire life. She turned around and walked out into the cold air. She got into the Tahoe, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She didn't start the engine. She just sat there, staring at the faded sign above the door, realizing that for the first time in her career, her money was completely and utterly useless. The black Tahoe did not get on the highway. Instead, Chloe drove 3 miles in the opposite direction and pulled into the cracked asphalt lot of the Starlight Motel. The neon sign buzzed a sickly, flickering red, missing the R and the T. It was the kind of place Vanguard Holdings wouldn't even bother buying to demolish. It was beneath their margin of error. She walked into the lobby, which smelled faintly of ammonia and stale cigarettes. An older man behind bulletproof glass barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as she handed him a black Amex card. Room 114 was a study in beige depression. The carpet was threadbare. The bedspread was a stiff floral pattern that hadn't been in style since the Reagan administration, and the heater rattled like a dying engine. Chloe placed her leather weekender bag on the wobbly luggage rack. She sat on the edge of the mattress. It sagged immediately under her weight. Her phone buzzed. Her assistant. 3 unread emails from the board. A text from her general counsel asking for final approval on the Apex liquidation schedule. She turned the phone off. She sat in the silence of the cheap room, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Tommy's words played on a continuous bruising loop in her head. You want to buy this place so you can pat yourself on the back. He was right. The brutal, unvarnished truth was that he had seen right through her. She hadn't come to Blackridge to save him. She had come to save herself. She had wanted absolution for leaving him behind, neatly packaged in a commercial lease agreement. She had approached his life the same way she approached a hostile takeover. Identify the vulnerability, apply overwhelming financial force, and dictate the terms. But Tommy Miller wasn't a distressed asset. He was a man with a heavy heart, holding his ground in a storm she couldn't buy off. If she left now, she would never see him again. The bank would take the garage. He would disappear into the grind of double shifts and cheap apartments, carrying his pride like a shield until it broke him. Chloe stood up. She unbuttoned the tailored wool coat. She took off the silk blouse, the Italian slacks, the armor she wore to conquer rooms. She dug into her bag and pulled out the only casual clothes she had packed. A thick charcoal cashmere sweater and a pair of dark denim jeans. She swapped the heels for a pair of low-leather boots. She looked in the scratched mirror above the dresser. She didn't look like a CEO. She looked like a woman who had nowhere to be. She left the motel and drove to a local diner she remembered from 15 years ago. It was still there, smelling of burnt bacon and strong coffee. She bought 2 large black coffees and a paper bag full of plain donuts. When the Tahoe pulled back into the gravel lot of Miller and Son Auto, it was just past 4 in the afternoon. The sky was turning a bruised, wintry purple. Tommy was out in the lot, wrestling a heavy hydraulic jack out from under a rusted F250. His breath plumed in the cold air. He saw the black SUV pull up. He stopped, resting his hands on his hips, his jaw setting into a hard, unforgiving line. Chloe stepped out. She didn't hold a briefcase or a folder. She held the cardboard drink tray and the greasy paper bag. She walked up to him. The wind whipped her hair across her face. I told you we were closed, Tommy said. His voice was flat, devoid of the heat from earlier. It was worse than anger. It was indifference. I'm not here to talk about the bank, Chloe said. She held out the tray. I brought coffee, black, no sugar, just like you drank it when you were pretending to like it so you could sit with the older guys at the diner. Tommy looked at the coffee. He looked at her jeans. He looked at the distinct lack of corporate aggression in her posture. He didn't take the cup. You're wasting your time, Chloe. I have 3 cars to finish before tomorrow, or I don't make payroll for my part-time kid. I don't have time to play memory lane with you. Then don't play, she said, her tone steady. Drink the coffee. Work on the cars. I'll stay out of your way. Why? He demanded, stepping closer. The sheer exhaustion on his face was heartbreaking. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? I want to understand, Chloe said quietly. I spent 15 years building a life where I never have to ask anyone for anything, and I looked at you today and I realized you built the exact opposite. You rely on this town, and they rely on you. I want to see it. Before Tommy could answer, the side door of the garage banged open. A tiny figure marched out into the cold. Lily. She was wearing oversized denim overalls and a bright yellow puffy coat that made her look like a walking lemon. She had the frayed rabbit under one arm and a smudged piece of paper in the other hand. Dad, she called out, her voice a reedy, high-pitched chirp. The phone keeps ringing and I can't reach the button to make it stop. Tommy's hard edges vanished instantly. The shift was so profound it made Chloe's breath hitch. He wiped his greasy hands furiously on his rag before dropping to one knee. Hey, Bug, he said, his voice softening into something incredibly tender. I told you to stay in the office where the space heater is. It's freezing out here. But the phone, Lily insisted, waving the paper. She stopped and looked at Chloe. Large, curious brown eyes, Tommy's eyes, studied the stranger. Who is that? Tommy hesitated. He looked up at Chloe, a complex war of emotions playing out across his face. protection, resentment, and a deep, buried sorrow. "This is an old friend, Lily," Tommy said quietly. "Her name is Chloe." "Does her car need fixing?" Lily asked, sniffing. "No," Chloe said, stepping forward. She crouched down, placing the coffee tray on the hood of the nearest dead car. She looked Lily directly in the eye, smiling a genuine, unpracticed smile. "Your dad already fixed my car. He's very good at it." Lily nodded sagely, accepting this fact. "He fixes everything, except the toaster. The toaster is dead." A small, unexpected laugh escaped Chloe's throat. It felt strange. "Good." The phone inside the garage began to ring again. A loud, shrill, mechanical bell that echoed off the corrugated steel. Tommy closed his eyes and sighed, a sound of pure defeat. "That's the parts distributor. If I don't pick up, they skip my delivery for tomorrow and I can't finish the F250. He looked at the heavy jack, then at the garage. He couldn't do both. "Go," Chloe said. Tommy stared at her. "Go answer the phone, Tommy. I'll watch her." He looked at the billionaire CEO kneeling in the gravel of his failing shop, staring at his daughter. For a second he looked like he wanted to argue. But the phone rang again. He stood up, pointing a stern finger at Chloe. "Don't move." He sprinted into the garage. Chloe was left alone with the little girl. Lily held out the smudged piece of paper. "I drew a truck, but the wheels are lopsided." Chloe took the paper. It was a chaotic scribble of blue and black crayon. It was magnificent. "I think," Chloe said softly, "that lopsided wheels just mean it's going really fast." By 6 o'clock, the sun had vanished entirely, plunging Blackridge into a bitter, biting cold. Inside the garage, the temperature wasn't much better. The massive bay doors were poorly insulated, letting the wind howl through the gaps. Tommy was buried under the hood of a 2012 Honda Civic, fighting a seized alternator bolt that refused to budge. His knuckles were bleeding. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist, leaving a fresh streak of grime, and peered toward the glass-enclosed office at the back of the shop. Chloe was still there. She had been there for 2 hours. She hadn't complained about the cold, the smell, or the noise. Instead, she had taken off her expensive coat, draped it over Lily to act as a blanket, while the girl slept on the worn faux leather sofa, and sat down at his chaotic, paper-strewn desk. Tommy hit the bolt with a wrench. It didn't move. He cursed under his breath. He didn't know what to make of her. The woman who had thrown $100 bills out her window on Friday night seemed entirely disconnected from the woman currently sorting through his vendor invoices. He wanted to be angry at her. Anger was clean. Anger was a fuel he recognized, but watching her tuck the coat around his daughter had drained the fury right out of him. He threw the wrench onto his cart. He needed a break before he broke something he couldn't afford to replace. He walked over to the office and pushed the door open. It screeched on its hinges. Chloe didn't jump. She was staring at a glowing laptop screen, a half-eaten donut sitting on a napkin beside her. The desk, which an hour ago had been a mountain of terrifying, unopened mail and disorganized receipts, was now arranged into neat, terrifyingly logical piles. "What are you doing?" Tommy asked, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake Lily. Chloe looked up. She took off a pair of reading glasses he hadn't known she wore. The harsh fluorescent light of the office caught the tired lines around her eyes. She looked older, suddenly. Real. "I'm looking at your books," she said simply. Tommy's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know." She leaned back in the creaking office chair. "But you were working, and the phone kept ringing, so I answered it. Your distributor out of Albany says the timing belt for the Subaru is delayed until Thursday. I told them that was unacceptable and got them to priority ship it from a secondary warehouse in Syracuse. It'll be here by 10 a.m. tomorrow, no extra charge." Tommy blinked. He had been fighting with that distributor for 3 weeks. "How did you do that?" I asked nicely. Chloe said, the ghost of a smirk touching her lips. Then I reminded them of the freight regulations for secondary logistics networks. They decided it was easier to send the belt than argue. Tommy let out a slow, breathy chuckle. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. Ruthless. Efficient, she corrected him. The silence settled between them. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was just heavy. Heavy with the weight of the years, the unsaid apologies, the vastly different lives they had led. Chloe picked up a stack of papers banded together with a rubber band. Tommy, she started, her voice losing its corporate edge. You're drowning. Your labor rates are 10 years out of date. You're eating the cost of part surcharges because you don't want to pass it on to your customers. You've been doing free diagnostic work for half the town. These people are my neighbors, Chloe, Tommy defended, his voice tight. Old Mrs. Higgins can barely afford her groceries. I'm not going to charge her $100 just to tell her why her check engine light is on. I get that, I do. But you can't run a charity if the charity is going bankrupt. Chloe tapped the desk. You're a brilliant mechanic. Your father taught you well, but you are a terrible businessman. I don't care about business. He looked away, staring out at the darkened bays. I cared about keeping the lights on. I cared about keeping Sarah comfortable. And now I just care about keeping a roof over Lily's head. He had said it. He had spoken Sarah's name out loud. Chloe looked down at her hands. The polished nails seemed absurd in this dingy room. I read the file, Tommy, she said softly. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you went through. Tommy swallowed hard. The memory of the hospital rooms, the beeping machines, the slow agonizing fate of his wife. It was a weight he carried every second of every day. To hear Chloe acknowledge it felt like a physical blow, but also, strangely, like a release. It was hell, he admitted, his voice rough. He looked at Lily sleeping soundly beneath the designer coat. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. And when she died, this place, this town, it was all I had left of her. She loved this town. He looked back at Chloe. His eyes were red. That's why I got so mad this afternoon. When you walked in, talking about acquisitions and leases and capital improvements, you looked at this place and saw a distressed asset. You saw a tax write-off. He tapped his chest. This is my life, Chloe. This is my father's sweat. This is the place where I brought Sarah after we got married. I won't let you buy it just so you can feel better about leaving it. Chloe didn't flinch. She took the hit. She deserved it. You're right, she said. Tommy frowned. What? You're right. I was arrogant. I was hiding behind a checkbook because it's the only way I know how to interact with the world anymore. She stood up. She walked around the desk until she was standing a foot away from him. When I sat in my car on Friday night, powerless, and you walked out of the rain, I realized something terrible, Tommy. I have 1,000 employees who answer to me. I have a board that fears me. I have a bank account that I can't even comprehend. But if I break down on the side of the road, there is absolutely no one coming for me. Her voice cracked, just slightly. The impenetrable CEO of Vanguard Holdings was completely exposed. I left this town because I was terrified of being trapped. But I built my own trap. And looking at you, working until your hands bleed, protecting your daughter, refusing to bend, you're the richest man I know. Tommy stared at her. He saw past the boardroom armor. He saw the 18-year-old girl sitting in the passenger seat of his Honda, dreaming of a world that turned out to be much colder than she expected. He reached out. His hand was rough, calloused, and stained with permanent grease. He didn't care. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Chloe's breath hitched. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes for a fraction of a second. So, Tommy said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. What do we do now? The rain started again around midnight, a slow, rhythmic drumming against the metal roof of the garage. Lily had been carried up to the apartment by Tommy, tucked into bed with her inhaler on the nightstand. Chloe had followed him up. She now sat at the rickety kitchen table, a mug of instant coffee warming her hands. The apartment still smelled like boiled cabbage, but it felt remarkably warm. Tommy walked out of the bathroom, drying his hair with a towel. He had scrubbed most of the grease off, wearing a clean gray t-shirt and flannel pajama pants. He looked exhausted, but the rigid, defensive tension in his shoulders was gone. He sat down opposite her at the small table. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just listened to the rain. "I revised the contract," Chloe said, breaking the silence. She slid a piece of lined notebook paper across the table. It was covered in her sharp, precise handwriting. Tommy looked at the paper, but he didn't pick it up. "We're back to business?" "This isn't Vanguard business," Chloe clarified. "This is me. Personal capital." Tommy narrowed his eyes. "I told you, Chloe. I don't want a handout." "It's not a handout. It's a partnership. Read it." Reluctantly, Tommy pulled the paper toward him. He read the handwritten terms. 1. Thomas Miller retains 100% ownership of the deed and property of Miller and Son Auto. 2. Chloe Bennett provides a zero-interest personal loan to clear all existing bank debt and medical liens, payable over a 20-year term. 3. Chloe Bennett acquires a 30% equity stake in the operational profits of Miller and Son Auto, acting as a silent logistics partner. 4. Miller and Son Auto agrees to priority servicing for Vanguard fleet vehicles at market rate labor costs. Tommy stopped reading. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the structure. It wasn't a bailout. It was a lifeline that required him to climb. He still had to work. He still had to pay it back. But the suffocating pressure of the foreclosure, the predatory interest rates, the immediate threat of ruin, it was gone. 30% equity, Tommy noted, tapping the paper. "You're a shark. I ran your revised numbers based on Vanguard's regional fleet. Even giving up 30%, your net take-home will triple by year 2. I'm a shark, Tommy, but I make my partners very wealthy." Tommy leaned back in his chair. He looked around the small, shabby kitchen. He thought about the stack of bills on the counter. He thought about Lily's winter boots. Then he thought about the garage, about the legacy of his father, and the fact that he wouldn't have to pack up his tools in 28 days. He looked at Chloe. "Why?" "Because you're a terrible businessman." Chloe smiled, the expression reaching her eyes. "And I'm a terrible mechanic. We fix each other's blind spots." "I don't know if I can trust you, Chloe," he said honestly. "You left once. You have a whole life in a glass tower. You'll get bored of playing small-town garage manager." "I don't want to manage the garage. I want to manage the logistics." She leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "I'm not leaving my company. I'm not moving back to Blackridge permanently, but I'm not running away anymore either. I want this to work. I want to build something real, something that doesn't just exist on a spreadsheet." She reached across the table. She laid her hand flat on the wood, palm up. An offering. "Let me help you save your shop, Tommy. Let me do this one thing right." Tommy looked at her hand, smooth, manicured, unblemished. He looked at his own hands, scarred, calloused, permanently stained, oil and water. They shouldn't mix. They never had. But out on Route 9, in the freezing rain, they had bridged a blown fuse. Slowly, Tommy reached across the table. He didn't shake her hand. He laced his fingers through hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong. 20 years, Tommy murmured. "That's a long time to be tied to a mechanic." "I'm a long-term investor," Chloe replied softly. They sat there in the quiet apartment, the rain washing the grease and the mud from the world outside. The past 15 years couldn't be erased. The ghosts of the people they used to be and the people they had loved were still in the room, but the crushing weight of the future had lifted. Tommy squeezed her hand. For the first time in a decade, the billionaire CEO didn't feel alone. And for the first time in 4 years, the mechanic felt like he could finally breathe. "All right," Tommy said, a slow, genuine smile breaking across his tired face. "Let's fix it." Did Chloe and Tommy's story keep you hooked until the very end? Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't found in a boardroom, but in the courage to face our past and rebuild our lives alongside the people who ground us. If you love this deep emotional journey of redemption, second chances, and the beautiful collision of two different worlds, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that true power is found in human connection. And don't forget to subscribe to our video channel for more grounded, hard-hitting dramas that speak directly to the heart.